I'm sorry. Hello. Welcome to That Early Childhood Nerd. I'm Heather Burnt-Santy, and Richard Cohen and Bethany Corrie have been cracking me up, and I couldn't get a hold of myself once I hit record. We just had the most amazing pre-recording adventure.
Everyone missed out.
Right. Yeah. In which we said about 6 times we should be recording this. Anyway, welcome Bethany and welcome Richard.
Hi.
Hello.
I love having you both on. So we are going to talk today. Do you want to say anything before I go into the quote? Do you guys have anything that you want to talk about? Okay. So we're going to talk about mindfulness. And the quote we have to start the conversation comes from a book. It's a brand new book called Finding Your Way Through Conflict, Strategies for Early Childhood Educators by Chris, I don't know how to say his last name, Amirault or Amaro, I don't know, and Christine Snyder. I'll know before long because they're going to be on the show.
Ooh.
And it's about
Name
adults
dropper.
in conflict. I know, I'm practicing. I'll tell you a story about name dropping during the accreditation visit when we're not recording anymore. Anyway, so this is a book about adults working together and having conflict. So not like helping children with their conflicts. And one of the things that they revisit through the book is the idea of mindfulness. So the quote that first stood out for me that I wanted to talk about on a show is this. I got to get back here to the author, John Kabat-Zinn, the founder of the mindfulness-based stress reduction clinic at the University of Massachusetts Medical School, defines mindfulness as paying attention in a particular way, on purpose, in the present moment, and non-judgmentally. For early childhood educators, responding to a series of challenging, unnerving situations with children, families, and colleagues each day requires paying close, purposeful attention in the moment and without judgment. So I'll just start by saying the reason that this stood out to me, and just to sort of confess, is that I tend to avoid early childhood conversations about mindfulness because it's become a buzzword, and that's just how I react to things that become buzzwords, and then they're turned into products that you can buy, or it's a gimmick that you're using still with the intent to control children. So often that's how I see it used, is if we do mindfulness, the children will be calmer and then they won't misbehave, or then they'll do what I want. And because that's not what I think it should be, I tend to just go the other direction and not pay much attention to it. But in my life, I try to be very mindful and have, practiced meditation and done things like that. But anyway, this was a good, for me, sort of redefining of what it could look like in early childhood for children and for adults. So I'll just leave that there as my starting point and let you guys talk about what you think about the quote.
Well, I was trying to remember if it was you or Keisha Reed, which now that you said that, I think it's both of you.
Oh.
That anytime I would bring up mindfulness, like I get an eye roll of like, oh, that we're not talking about mindfulness.
Yeah. It's not that I devalue the concept, it's the implementation, and Yeah.
And I think it's interesting because if we're being responsive caregivers, then like we're practicing mindfulness, and I think it's a huge part of what we're already, if we're practicing mindful care, or if we're responsive caregiving, we're already doing mindfulness, and we're already teaching mindfulness to children.
Sure.
In our actions, because like we're in the moment with them, and we're having them be in the moment.
Yeah. So how would you define responsive caregiving in that context? Like if someone has never heard that phrase before.
So for me, it's slowing down, paying attention to what's happening in the moment. Sorry, my baby just crawled in the room.
He's always welcome on the show. Yeah.
Here he comes. Good pod here. Sorry.
Yeah.
And not reacting to situations that come up, but just noticing what's really happening, and not making those snap judgments about, oh, this is conflict, I need to stop it. But
yeah,
just taking that pause.
Yeah, I asked for clarification because I think responsive caregiving, sometimes people have the same reaction that they do to child-led or play-based, and they just imagine chaos with the adult not really having much of an intentional role in there. And we know that's not true of those two other ways of being with children. And so I wanted to clarify that responsive caregiving also is not chaotic and
chaos,
unintentional. Yeah.
May I add into the definition
please.
you're building there?
Yeah.
So it was really cool while we were all talking about this, and even in this moment, to watch Bethany and her baby. Right?
yes.
Right.
And her face.
She makes faces. She reaches her arms out. Right. She is very, very aware that the baby is right there off camera. Right. She and her baby are in attunement to each other. She's very attuned to her baby's needs and responses, right? And so when we talk about responsive caregiving, we talk about doing the hard work of becoming attuned with every child in your class, so that you can respond in a way that, hello, baby. Hi, baby. Hi. Cameo appearance by a cutie patootie.
Yeah. Well, another cutie patootie.
A second, yes. There's 3 cutie patooties and me. So watch the video version of this, listeners, because it's going to be much better, because this baby is so flippin' cute.
It's cutie patootie content you do not want to miss.
That's right. Special guest star appearance. Ooh, blowing a kiss. So when you watch Bethany and her baby, what's your baby's name? Francis. When you watch Bethany and Francis, you see a great example of an adult and a child that are attuned and sort of do that dance with each other and finish each other's words and know what each other wants next. The goal, theoretically, is for us to be able to do that with, as professionals, with each child in our care. And if we can do that, and we know really where they're at, what's happening with them in the present moment, then we can respond to their needs and guide them. It's not chaos. It really results in a much calmer, guided experience between adult and child.
Yeah, it's
and
intention.
So then the question is, what's the obstacle to that for us, to really being present and attuned and responsive? And that's sometimes our thoughts and our feelings get in the way. Like Bethany was saying, we jump to an interpretation of behavior based on a lot of things, instead of being really present with what's happening and being able to respond to it effectively. So mindfulness allows us to do that. That's it, just saying that.
Yeah. Excuse me. So I know we're going to.
What is mindfulness?
Yeah.
But we'll get there.
Yeah. I was going to say, I know we'll probably go in a couple different directions with this, because I am a self-admitted mindfulness reactor. And Bethany, I know in practice is just what's described here, in terms of being aware at every moment of what, paying close, purposeful attention, being in the moment. And then, Richard, like you said before we were recording, you've done keynotes and workshops and about this topic for a long time. So
half day, full day, and weekend long retreats on mindfulness for early childhood caregivers at richardcohen.com.
Yeah, remind me if I don't remember at the end to let you plug that again, like at the end of the show. Yeah.
To let me plug richardcohen.com and my mindfulness retreats and all the other professional development things I do. Sure, I'll remind you of that later at richardcohen.com.
Okay.
Who was talking about name dropping?
Right?
I was just being mindful
of his own name.
Of my pocketbook.
Yeah. So I think as I was looking at this quote, what they're describing as mindfulness, I have always sort of described as being intentional. And but I like it better, I think. Because I talk a lot, people who listen know, and with my students at the college, I talk a lot about being intentional in every moment. And one of the things that I have said repeatedly, particularly when I was in a position of training staff, like when I was the center director or the preschool teacher in the language preschool. Hi, baby.
Keep talking about it. Don't mind us.
I would talk about things like, I want us to take into consideration the quality of life for the child at all through the day. So even if we're just washing hands or waiting for their turn to wash hands or moving from here to there, I want us always to be thinking about the child's quality of life in that moment and being intentional. And so when I read this, I was like, okay, that's really what I was trying to say. Right. And maybe this is a kinder, gentler way of saying those things, because I know that when I say those things, it seems judgmental to the people who have been rushing kids through those routines, and or they may perceive it as being judgmental.
Yeah, that may be more about you than the subject, Heather.
Okay. Well, it's my show.
Right. So I'll just jump in and say, yes, I agree
that. Why did
you.
I say that?
Mindfulness and intentionality are very related.
Yeah.
And the other piece I would just lay out there for the conversation is that the bridge between the way our adult minds work and the way that our customers, right, the people we're there to serve, young children, work, is that young children live very much in the present moment, right? But our minds are often caught up in the future or the past. And so it's hard for us. We can be intentional, but the goal of the intentionality is to be present, because that's where the little ones live. And so mindfulness is there because it's hard for our minds to be present. I started on this journey decades and decades ago with a book called Chop Wood, Carry Water. And it meant whatever you're doing, even the simple tasks like chopping wood or carrying water, or as you said, washing your hands or zipping up a jacket. How do you do that intentionally, as you said, and not just on autopilot? To me, that's like the question. One of the ways to the questions of asking the question that we're all pondering right now.
Yeah. And I want to hear what Bethany thinks about that question.
Absolutely. Sorry.
Yeah. No, I wasn't. You were done. I was waiting for that pause, because I think Bethany probably has an answer here.
I know she does.
I hate to disappoint you.
Oh no!
But I slightly was
distracted and you weren't listening.
Well,
you weren't present for the podcast?
I was present for Francis.
No, he's gone.
Yeah.
But I was thinking about the podcast, but my mind had moved on. And so I wasn't being present for you, Richard.
Story of my life, Bethany.
Right. So Richard, do you remember the question? Do you remember what you just said?
Let's just be present and go with the flow. So where's your mind at, Bethany?
Well, and so I find that
she asks with trepidation.
That this is like the key of mindfulness too, is that whether you're practicing mindfulness just yourself and maybe doing when I was getting ready for this conversation, my mind was going in 100 different directions, and I stopped. I pulled out my phone with one of my meditation apps that I hadn't used in a long time, but had just remembered. And I put on a 6-minute little guided meditation. And I was laughing and crying at just how spot on it was, because Richard's talking and my brain's already going to the next thing that I want to bring up.
Right.
And so I'm not paying attention, but that bit of mindfulness is you're just, the point is just to come back to this moment. So I think that it's fine that I wasn't paying attention to you, Richard, because
that was all carefully scripted.
It was.
If you look back at the quote, it says, "Come back to the present moment with compassion." I think that's it. Right.
Yeah. And
so it is fine that you did that. And the challenge is that most people will jump into shame or blame or self-judgment.
Yeah. And doing it without judgment. Exactly. Yep. That was the piece that I was thinking about, was the piece of without judgment, and how, I think always in the winter, my depression kind of goes off the roof. And so this spring, and I'm in Middle Tennessee, so our spring starts in the beginning of February. And so I started realizing like, oh, like I haven't been in the moment. I haven't been taking care of myself and paying attention to what is happening right here in this moment. I've been kind of off the depression cliff. And if I had been able to have that awareness of mindfulness, I could have given myself that bit of grace and that bit of self-compassion of like, all right, that's where you're at. How are we going to move forward? Like, and I think that's important for yourself as a caregiver, because you have moments all the time where either the situation is you can react or you did react poorly. And, you know, you can, after that moment, you can beat yourself up and just be in a bad mood about it and kind of keep digging that hole of reacting poorly, or you can give yourself that self-compassion and not just acknowledging like, wow, I messed up. Like I lost my cool and you know, yelled at you for being a kid. And I can apologize and move on for that and try to make amends, or I can just keep getting angry about it.
So how do you make that switch? What does it take within you to make that transition?
I think the awareness, right? Like I'm paying attention to what I'm doing, and I'm taking that moment of stopping and reflecting. You know, we talk about that with children, like with Rye and Magda Gerber, you know, it's observe, respond, reflect. And so that's what mindfulness is. You know, you're being mindful in how you're caregiving for children. And so I think if we're doing that with children, we need to do that with ourselves. And it's not easy, but just it's a constant practice. You're constantly having to be aware of it and not in autopilot.
Yeah, it's a skill you're always building over the course of your life. You never get there. You're just in the process, not waiting for the product.
Right.
Always on the journey. May I add some, just like a little science to what you just said? What you said was so perfect. Can I add more to it? Or do you want to keep?
Yes, you may, Richard. Continue.
Thank you for your permission, Bethany. It felt kind of passive aggressive, but if that's what I get, I'll take it. So earlier when you were talking, you used the word react. You react to things. But when you quoted Magda, you said respond, right? And I just want to point out to listeners and viewers that that's a really important distinction, and why mindfulness allows you to respond instead of react. So just to put a little neurology around it, we know that there's the reptilian brain back here that, you know, we inherited from millions of years of ancestors that keep us safe and alive and not being someone else's food. And so it rules our fear and our caution and all of those things, and it's there to protect us. But now we're a species that has this wonderful frontal lobe that lets us use ration and reason to better address any situation, whether it's working with a young child, a coworker that did something that bugged us, whatever it is. And what happens is, just because we're human beings, if we don't do the practice over time, like exercising your body that Bethany just said, we get stuck here. And something happens and it could trigger something from 30 years ago that reminds us of that. We don't know why it happens, but instead of really being present with the child and seeing what's really happening and being able to use the higher level parts of our brain to be able to say, no, this is what's happening. The child is trying to communicate with me by throwing that tantrum. He's not trying to ruin my day. But the part back here in the back of my brain goes, that kid's ruining my day because I had these 5 things planned. It was going to be so awesome. And now he's throwing a tantrum. It's the mindfulness. It's the breathing and calming down so that I can let myself use this part of my brain that allows me to respond rather than react.
Mm-hmm. And I think thinking of it that way, understanding it in that way, that this is a sort of a evolutionary biological function of your brain, then that sort of allows us to not beat ourselves up for the moments when we have lapses, when we're not in the moment, when we're not being, mindful and intentional. We can both realize that this isn't someone saying, I'm a terrible person. This is someone acknowledging the function of our brain. We start with that sort of self-protective piece, and we can pause and we can practice identifying that, and then how to bring in the reasoning part of the brain into the moment. Then it that just is much less judgmental. It's not about you being a terrible teacher for falling out of the moment. It's about an opportunity to become a more mindful teacher with practice. And then like any skill that we're practicing, it becomes this frontal lobe becomes more easily accessible in those moments of stress, because we have practiced and paid attention and responded to ourselves. So it's responsive in a different way.
Right. Just like we know young children's brains need repetition to acquire a new skill. So do we. Practice, repetition, right? And when you're able to step outside that judgment and say, oh, all that judgment and self-blame, and believe me, I know it, I do it 10 times a day, even though I've been practicing this for decades. That judgment comes from this reptilian part of the brain and fear, right? So when the child says, I hate you, you're the worst teacher ever, this part of my brain goes, oh my God, are they right? I think they're right. I always thought I was the worst teacher ever, but now someone's called me out. And maybe I actually am. Or what is wrong with that kid? I'm not the worst teacher ever. That kid is a pain in the butt. I can't stand that kid. That's all happening right back here.
Yeah.
And all that stuff that's happening keeps us from a more calm, peaceful view of what's happening to really resolve it.
Yeah. So we're not literally,
that's just a function of my brain and brain chemicals. It's nothing, even the blame itself, I can let go of because it's just part of being human. Then I can get to the good stuff.
And then we start seeing things like, I'm trying to think about, some of the pressures that lead us in a classroom full of children to, not be as responsive or reflective about it. And it's things like, well, what if my director walks in and this is happening, or what if a parent gets mad, or what if, so we're not at this point fearful of being eaten. And that's not why that part of the brain is engaging, but it is still self-protection. It is still identity protection, I guess, kind of. And so
this part is about stress.
Right. The back
Whether
part.
It's an animal coming to eat you or a boss you're worried about is going to judge you. We're wired to start here when anything stressful comes up in our lives. But we're at a place now of conscious evolution where we're capable of going, oh yeah, that's happening. High self-judgment, high fear. Let me breathe through this and utilize the better parts of the higher parts of my brain. It's not easy, but it is possible.
Yeah. I'm pausing for Bethany.
I was just thinking about how when you make that visible to the children too, that's the way that you're actually going to be able to introduce mindfulness into your classroom. Like, you said, Heather, that mindfulness has become a commercialized topic, and it's a thing that you can buy. And, if you go on Facebook, you can get ads for, even things that are are actual good, useful tools. It's a product that you buy, and you have your mindfulness posters and your mindfulness stuffed animal.
Right.
Right.
And it's in sort of search of a product when we're looking at it
Right.
that way. We're not that's not thinking about it as this process
Right.
that's just part of our lives every day. That's sort of presented as, if you engage in this mindfulness process, you will soon have a product
Right.
of a
You
calm
build
classroom.
you build your time in relaxation corner, and then
Yeah.
everybody's all just focused, and you have no more issues.
Yeah.
And no more
Right.
conflict in your classroom or
Those fucking corners.
Right. And even if it's free, like my 4 free YouTube videos on mindfulness that anyone can watch right now,
Uh-huh.
if you're influenced by people like, say, Heather or Bethany, to kind of turn your nose up at that and go, oh, it's a corporate thing, so it can't be valuable for me. That's just part of your brain talking, resisting. Oh,
Yeah.
no, I'm Heather and I'm a rebel, so I can't do anything that's trendy.
Well, I didn't know.
It's all
I
just
don't
this
ever
stuff in
say to
Heather's
someone
brain that's
else.
making her resist something really helpful to her.
I don't know that I've ever said, okay, everybody, fuck mindfulness.
Not out loud, but I've heard it.
But in
But
my
now
own
here
internal
on the
process.
podcast.
Yeah, now that it's on the
You've
podcast, people
implied
can
it many times.
clip that little sound bit out and turn it
Um,
into their ringtones.
But
All
I
right.
but I think when we're doing that intentionally, and I mean, the other day, like, I may have had 2 boys climb over the fence and escape my backyard, and I was
Allegedly, for any
Oh.
licensing reps watching.
Right.
She's
I'm-
leaving the state,
I'm
so let it
legally
It's leaving
unlicensed.
the
So,
state.
but I mean, I was very, 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 very angry and scared.
Sure.
go. Sure.
That moment of coming around the corner and they weren't in their secret monster hiding spot
Right.
was scary.
Right.
And so I did. I mean, I tried not to react as strongly as I was feeling, but I did react poorly. And then it was, I need to take a deep breath. I had them sit next to me while I was finishing a task to so I could calm down.
Right.
But then I, I told her, I was able to tell them, like, that really scared me and I got mad about it.
Yeah.
And so it was a moment that we could connect over it after I kind of lost I very much lost my cool.
Anyone would.
Right.
Anyone
Yes.
would.
Absolutely.
I have.
And yeah. I don't believe that, Richard.
Oh my God, I have. When you lose a child, or they go out of your sight, or they
Yeah.
climb
Oh,
over
yeah.
the fence,
Yeah.
believe me, I've been there.
Yeah.
And in those moments, the brain chemicals flow through your head. You're in massive fear. And then there's that whole other little ingredient of, oh my God, it's my fault.
Yeah.
And you're just totally unable to access this part of your brain
Yeah.
because it's overwhelmed with those chemicals.
Yeah. But taking that moment of stopping, reflecting on what happened. And, these were older children. And so, it wasn't like a toddler that would just thumb their nose at me and go on. But, but we were able to slow down. And that's a moment where they're getting that practice of,
And seeing it
they
modeled.
weren't the ones needing it to happen, but I needed it. And they were there watching me work through it.
Yeah.
And there's a very trendy word for what you just described.
What is it?
When you do that in front of the children and they watch you do that, calm down. Pop
Is
quiz,
it
what's that called?
co-regulation? Is it co-regulation?
Co-regulation. It was a perfect example, Bethany, of you used mindfulness in front of children and it allowed you to co-regulate with them.
Yeah.
Brilliant.
Thanks.
Good job losing those kids and
Thank you.
teaching them something good, Bethany.
So I try.
Yeah. Right before this recording, I was recording with my cuber and we were talking about actually challenging behaviors of adults, like things adults do that challenge children.
Oh.
But he told a story
Did
of
my name come up?
not in the recorded part.
Oh, okay. All right.
Anyway, he was talking about referring to Louise Derman Sparks and something that he had heard her say or read her say, where when she was part of the Perry Preschool Project, all of the children, this is a long roundabout way of doing this, all the children lived pretty close to the child care center, the early childhood center.
Yep.
And at one point, a 3-year-old just like left and walked home. And so I will say beforehand, I'm not discounting the safety aspects of either of these stories that we're talking about, but her first thought was how beautiful that he knows how to do that he could find his way home. And, instead of jumping to this child is out of control and not compliance or whatever. But my point with this is that that's another way, I think, of practicing mindfulness when we're working with young children, is that sort of, and maybe this is part of bringing it from the back of our brain to the top of our brain, thinking about the competence that you're seeing, even in the middle of what looks really chaotic, or being able to assume, or just to see. I don't even know how I want to describe this. Just that ability. I don't want to say reframe even, because it was in the moment, but to really see what's happening. And it's not all about us, even though it is for a moment while we're calming and coming to that place that you got to, Bethany. But it's a different way of, I guess, responding to what children are doing with us. Yeah. You do what you want with that. It felt like it didn't come out like I wanted it to, but listeners are used to that by now.
That makes a lot of sense. And I was kind of, it's not exactly it, but I was just thinking of Dan Hodgins with the moral issue out of a developmental issue.
Yeah.
And, like when you brought up that other example of like, wow, he knows how to make his way home. Mm-hmm. I'm thinking, oh, wow, like my fence is pretty high.
Right. There's a lot of physical skill involved in what just
kind of amazing that they, and I do have a really cool toy in the front yard that we play with, like at pickup time,
Mm-hmm.
And so that's what they wanted to get to. And they solved their problem. They wanted to go play with that. They figured out how to climb over the fence, which is high, safely.
Yeah. So, I mean, maybe what my connection was that perspective taking is part of our everyday mindfulness.
Yeah.
Anyway. And I mean, honestly, like right now because even when I was telling the story, I was still having that like anxiety, fear response. And now I'm like, oh, that totally changes my outlook on that experience.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
And it is, it is a bit of reframing, but.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think Heather was talking about reframing, seeing the opportunity or the accomplishment instead of the challenge or the danger. Mm-hmm. They're all there.
Yeah.
It's just, which do you allow your mind to focus on? I would also remind you though that the context is important.
Mm-hmm.
So when that happened to Louise, it was in the 80s. And the world was very different.
A different place. Time. Yes. We did address that in the episode that we were recording.
Okay. But that allowed her, she was better able to see the opportunity.
Yeah.
Because she didn't live in a world like we do, where we are enculturated to focus on all of the dangers and the risks, and risk as a bad word. Right. And, when Bethany said she allegedly may have let 2 kids climb over a fence, right? In this metaphor.
Someone she knows might have let this happen.
Yeah. It's just a made up, what do they call them in early childhood?
Her friend is also named Bethany.
It's a teacher story, whatever.
Vignette. It's a vignette.
Books, right? It's a vignette. But so the deal is, we've been in this field long enough to know everyone loses a kid at some point.
Mm-hmm.
It's just
these were the second and third kid that I've lost. Just
ever? Or
no,
okay.
Yeah.
In my 40 years, maybe I've lost, 3 or 4, I think.
Yeah. I'm much younger than you, Richard. So
She's
Thank
still
you
got
for
time.
reminding our listeners and viewers of that information. Of that
This is
fake
an
news.
excellent time to have these kinds of disclosures, Bethany, while you're thinking about looking for.
Well,
Yeah,
it's clear, developmentally, emotionally, Bethany is definitely younger than me. I think everyone can see that.
Sure.
yes, yes.
No, but my point is, if you're going to be honest about being in early childhood, at some point you lose a kid.
Yeah.
Maybe they just went into another room or whatever. It happens.
Mhm.
It happens because we're human. It happens because children are curious and smart and all those things. So when you said that, Bethany, it didn't faze me. I'm like, oh yeah, that happens. Sure,
yeah.
it happens all the time.
Yeah.
But when I was a director, when that happened, it was my job to fire the person.
Yeah. Me
And
too.
I had to let them go. And that's the world we live in now.
Mm-hmm.
So even though you're just being human and the children are being
Mhm.
normal humans,
Yeah.
as a director, I have rules around me now that preclude you from being just human.
Yeah. So it's a good thing you're your own boss, Bethany.
So true.
Yeah.
I would have fired myself if
I believe
that.
Right.
Yeah. So I guess I just need to add another disclaimer here. We've said it, and I'm sure listeners know this, but I feel like I have to say it. We're not advocating for lapses of supervision
No.
or taking
not at all.
taking it lightly when children get out of our
Well,
Get
and
out
we
of our
can
sight.
sort of joke about it because
everybody's safe now.
everybody's safe and
Right.
nothing tragic happens.
Yeah.
So that is also.
Yeah, we're not saying that it's right. We're just saying it happens
Mhm.
and we can't be afraid to talk about it because it's part of this work.
Yeah.
Well, and I was thinking about another situation. I had a 3.5-year-old, and we're playing with a little trinket toy that maybe we had for a birthday party or something. And so I had the leftovers here at my house, and everybody had taken one home.
Right.
And she's saying, well, oh, my red one's at home. And I was like, yeah, well, you can go and get that when you go home. And the next thing I hear is the front door opening and shutting. And I run up to the front door, and she's heading down the steps towards the direction of her house.
Bethany said I could go get it from home.
And it was, and she looks at me, and I said, where are you going? She said, well, I just have to go home and get my red one. And she knew, like,
right.
oh, my house is this direction,
Mhm.
and that's the way I come. I know how to get there.
Mhm.
And, that moment was less panic inducing. And so in that situation, I just kind of chuckled and moved on with it. But,
yeah, I'm going to pull it away from losing children.
I know we're really on this.
I didn't realize that was such an engrossing topic that we
Back
could
to
have
mindfulness.
We could have
You
done a
weren't
whole
being
episode
mindful,
about
Heather. The
Well,
great
and
example of not being mindful.
right.
Well, but this is a good practice of mindfulness because our brains took us on a little tangent, and now we're coming back
And
to
we
the
were
topic.
with it, and now we're back.
That's right.
Yeah, that's
we-
good.
Without judgment.
Sure.
Yeah, it was
I'm
fine.
only judging Heather
I was
in
going to
my
say,
head.
yeah, there's some judgment. We know that.
Not out loud.
So the other thing, just to bring it kind of back to the quote and back to mindfulness in our everyday stuff, the other thing that this made me think about was the difference between busyness and chaos in an early childhood space, and that it's really easy to feel like having all those children together is chaos because everyone's busy and it's loud. But if we stop and look at these 2 children doing this thing together and these 3 children doing this thing together, and we see all these little moments of busyness instead of this big picture of chaos, that it's very, I don't know if we were going to go anywhere with that, but that was another example that came to my mind of being purposeful attention and following what's happening in the moment.
Yeah, when I was a student in early childhood classes, the best class I ever took was observation. And we just went to a different program in St. Louis, Missouri every Tuesday. And by the end of the semester, we had this diversity of observation skills and different kinds of programs, good, bad, ugly, and otherwise. And I think back then is when I learned, this isn't so much about mindfulness, more just reacting to what you said, Heather. I learned the term joyful noise.
Yeah.
You all must know that term, right?
Yeah.
And so we were asked to do an observation with our eyes closed and to listen for the difference between chaos and, busyness, and the sound of joyful noise when it's loud, but everyone in the room is engaged.
Yeah.
Still loud, but it's I hear it now because I was trained that way, as joyful noise. And so I'll try to bring this back to mindfulness, just being able to notice when your brain is afraid that your boss or a parent is going to come in, is going to hear that as chaos.
Yeah.
You have to be able to notice what's happening. And if it's joyful noise, take a breath, enjoy it, and know that anyone else who comes in, you have the skill to explain to them and help them hear it the way you hear it.
Yeah. Well, I think thinking about mindfulness for me, sometimes it takes me to thinking about peace, and noise seems like it would be the opposite of peace. So it's a way of redefining mindfulness for myself, that it's not always about things being controlled and quiet and peaceful. It's about my own awareness and what I'm bringing and what I'm seeing and how I can shift that.
And I think about, in the quote, it mentions like yourself, children, and the families.
Yeah.
And when we're practicing mindfulness, and we see that joyful, or we hear that joyful noise, and we see the intentionality in what the children are doing, even if it looks like chaos, that's our job to
sort of translate it
to other people, and to show them, like, okay, well, when your kid, like, watch at pickup time, before the kids have noticed you're there, like, watch what they're doing, and you'll see, it looks like these two children are fighting, but it's just a conflict, and they're, it might be resolved and it by themselves, and they might continue on, or it might be resolved by them going their separate ways. But, not looking at those moments with judgment, but that's our job, to help the people see that in our group.
Yeah. So can we talk a little bit about what this mindfulness looks like specifically with families? We've talked about how it feels for ourselves and how it looks with children. But with families, how do you see this fitting?
May I give one example that maybe can be a transition to that?
Absolutely.
Answer that question. So just to transition from noise, right? And just to be annoyingly repetitive, right? We are members of the animal kingdom, and the back part of our brain is designed to be hyper aware of stress and any dangers. And so one of the things that evolutionarily our brains are immediately consider a threat is noise. It's immediately something we need to be attentive to. Noise usually means, for animals, danger, right? So in that moment that Bethany described, mindfulness is the ability for us to say, oh, okay, this part of my brain lit up because I'm exhausted and I'm stressed and I've been wearing a mask for 2 years. And so this part is really ruling me. And so I want to yell at the kids and tell them to be quiet. But if I can take that deep breath with the child, with parents who are behaving in their own myriad of ways with us, I can get past that moment of interpretation or misinterpretation and do what Louise did, see the opportunity instead of listening to this part of my brain that wants to see what's happening as a challenge. So that happens to us with parents too.
Yeah.
And so to me, that brings us back to Heather's question. So what does that look like? What are the challenges in working with parents, and how does mindfulness serve us there in that aspect of our job? Ready, go.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it depends on, I can think of sort of extreme examples, like if there's a conflict with that family member about a child's behavior, or they're making a request that we feel like is ridiculous. Those kinds of things where that sort of fight or flight reaction is there because I feel like then I need to protect my practice, my identity, my professionalism, my this and that, or my routines. And so in those moments, I guess it's easier for me to think about mindfulness playing a part because I have to bring myself back to that frontal lobe where the executive function action happens, for that conversation to be productive or for us to be able to move through that. But the other thing I think about is I can't control what that parent's process is looking like, or how aware they are of all that brain stuff, or just their own feelings, and how that might contribute. So in some ways it's really obvious for me to think about, okay, well, it's just about me still realizing that I need to pause and be in the present moment, not worry about what I think is going to happen, or what happened last week with this parent, or what happened 20 years ago with a parent who had a similar complaint, and just bring myself back into exactly what's happening. But I struggle to think of ways just in like everyday interactions with families to come up with those kinds of examples, I guess.
Well, I'll give you one little tiny mindfulness tip as feedback for what I just heard you say, Heather. As you were rolling that anecdote out and explaining that, you said, I've got to remember it's just me, right? And when you practice mindfulness and you get more skilled at it, you begin to understand you are not your brain chemistry. There's this wonderful, magnificent spirit that's you, and it's unlike anything else. And it's in this body that has these chemicals that flow through my brain. And when you say, well, it's just me, it keeps you right here in blame or even ego or whatever. And when you're able to say, you know what, it was just my brain chemicals that made me feel that way. But who I am wants to really connect with this parent.
Gotcha. Okay. I mean, so I don't remember
what you said was perfect. I was just picking on me versus this thing happening in me. That little distinction.
I think one of the things I was trying to say is that when I said it's just me, it's like I can only control my part of that, and I can't really control the parent's part. But also there is me that's trying to be protected, and that's why I jump into that.
Right.
Yeah. Okay.
And again, mindfulness says the best way to do that is to separate me from the processes, the physical, chemical processes happening inside me. I'm not them.
Yeah.
I'm responsible, but I'm not them. There's something else that I need to step outside and look at. Would be mindfulness. Right. So like, when I was just teaching my little students, they're not so little, but the basic idea of the pyramid, right? The teacher and the parent, and we're both partners to support the child who's up here, right?
Yeah.
But so we're right now, to me, the question you're asking is about this partnership down here, right?
Right. And
one of the things that there's many challenges to a healthy partnership. And one of those is my brain chemistry and how I will interpret what the parent says as a threat. If I'm not awake and aware it's going to be much harder for me to partner with them if my brain is telling me they're threatening.
Yeah. So just another example that comes to mind is when I was a center director and families would call looking for childcare and ask something like, so are you just like daycare, or do you learn anything there? And I would immediately feel that in my whole body, and had to really practice that specific instance because it happened more than once. I could literally sort of replay it and practice and develop a better response. But sometimes
an interesting thing that our brains do, because what you just said to me is so common for early childhood people. We get so triggered by that. But if a child asks a silly question, we just think, oh, sure. Of course they don't understand. So how can I help them understand why the sky is blue? But if a grown-up asks us a silly question, we get triggered and defensive. And
I just need to reframe it as a silly question. But I mean, where I eventually sort of landed is, well, that's what they think they should ask. Like, that's what they've been sold.
And my job is to educate people. I may not like it, but and I didn't sign up for that when I got in this field, but it turns out that's part of my job. Dealing with ignorant people that I'm constantly, like I remember talking to Bev Boss years ago. Remember she wrote that the book Beyond the Basics? And she said, Richard, I never dreamed after doing this for 30 years, I'd still be on the basics. I'd still be explaining the basics to people. I never got to the advanced stuff in my whole life.
Yeah.
And I've always remembered that, because it turns out that's my life too.
Yeah.
There's just always new people being born who aren't schooled in this. And it turns out my job is to just continually go over the basics with other people.
That's a good, that'll be the next t-shirt. There's just always new people being born.
I like the other one what was the one that Bethany said? Fuck mindfulness.
That was me.
That was you. That's my next t-shirt.
Love mindfulness. I would never say that.
No.
It's a very Heather thing to say. I'm sorry.
Right.
I only said it to myself. It was an inward thing.
No, you said it out loud.
No, I know.
Listening and watching has now heard you.
Yeah.
You're literally on the record.
Okay, fine. Yeah. So, hey, Bethany, is there more stuff in your notes that you wanted to talk about
Bethany,
with this?
say something.
Because you said you took notes and studied, and I didn't, clearly.
I did so
Don't
much
let some guy
studying.
mansplain for you.
No, that's not what's happening.
Thinking about the parent partnership, there is that level that our job is to come to the parents without judgment, because they've never been there, right? We've done this
Sure.
for 40 years.
Right.
And
some of us.
Some of
Right.
And so, we've been able to work through those situations. And I think about like examples that other people have given of their interactions with parents, like, oh, how do I get them to not do TV time if that's not a value that I have? Or how do I, they just came to me and said my 15-month-old already knows 10 letters, and we need to continue teaching them.
We don't want to lose any ground here.
Right.
Yeah.
And just being mindful of how we react to them or respond to them. And that's a way that, we can't, I guess we could sit down and just tell them that they need to be mindful about it too.
Yeah.
But our actions are, and us working through those things with them is how that, we can bring mindfulness into that partnership of paying attention to what's happening without judgment.
And I mean, I think that the language we use can impact that process too, just in general. So then what struck me there, Bethany, was you saying, a provider asking and a teacher asking, how can I talk to them about TV time if that's not a value that I have? And that changes so much in the conversation and the way we think about it and approach it if we can start to talk about things in those more non-judgmental ways and use language that's a little bit, I don't even know what I want to say. And I know that I'm not saying that I am good at this, because anyone who listens to the podcast knows judgment seeps in.
Well, it does for everybody. Yeah.
Everyone is always on their journey of getting better at it.
Yeah. What were you saying, Bethany?
Sorry.
We're all going to respond or react with judgment to things. And that's part of the practice of, but I feel that a lot of parents, and I'm in a small program, and so I don't have a big subset of parent interactions, but they want to do better. And so I think when we are more intentional with how we're talking and the language we're using, that seeps over to them. And even if it's not in that moment, that they have a great revelation that we want them to have, that continued practice of yourself interacting with them, then that will be, you're building that relationship. And that's, I think, another piece. Because you can't make change, and you can't further your mindfulness impact if you don't have a relationship.
Right. Yeah, we are in a field of human service, And our field would not work well if we didn't bring our humanity to work with us every day. Letting ourselves be fully human with young children is what helps them to thrive.
Yeah.
But it also creates so many risks and challenges for us in this field to be a professional who is bringing their humanity to work. And so, right, it just is. It's just incredibly challenging with every new unexpected challenge a parent brings to you, right? So Bethany, I think what you said is 100%, it's spot on. And I think the question for this podcast is, if I were to boil it down for the listeners, how can we be more like Bethany? That's really the goal.
Right.
But no, just really like in that story, really, to not joke about it.
Yeah.
Bethany, she was able to clearly state her goal and of how she wants to serve parents and help them flourish. And then the question for this podcast is, how do we use mindful thinking to get us there? So how do we do that?
I don't know. Do you have an answer?
Mindfulness.
Mindfulness. We do it with mindfulness. We buy a mindfulness kit, and we have a parent night where we talk about mindfulness.
On richardcohen.com, is there a...
Oh yeah, that's right. It just starts with breathing.
Yeah.
It starts with getting in the present moment and then just noticing without judgment how your mind is way on the past, way on the future. You may not even be able to pinpoint where in the past, right? You're talking with a dad and there's something about him that rubs you the wrong way. And you can't really pinpoint who he reminds you of from 20 years ago that is being triggered right now. But just by being able to breathe and go, oh yeah, that does not have to do with this person who just wants to get better at parenting. This is something else from my history. I just need to recognize that and breathe and pull myself back to be present with this parent and not judge myself while I'm doing that, so I can really be here for that parent. And that's a mental emotional process that you two don't like using the M word to call it, but that's what you do. Mindfulness. Heather.
Listen to me, Richard.
What?
It's not what we've been talking about as mindfulness in this conversation is not the mindfulness I rebel against. It's the early childhood catalog product that you can buy with the goal of
the mindfulness curriculum.
The mindfulness curriculum with the goal of a controlled classroom.
Yeah.
That
we're rebelling against the consumerist society that we're all in.
Yes.
I think that's one thing we three have in common is that we're so angry and frustrated by consumerism.
Yeah.
And how it's affected our field negatively.
Yeah. And so I do pull away from conversations or things because I have that sort of internal frustration. But what we're talking about here, I am 100% in favor of. Right. This is not the mindfulness I think we should fuck. It's the commercialist.
All right, everybody, do the other mindfulness, the good one.
Do the good one, and the end. That's the end of the show. We have been talking a long time. We probably should wrap it up. And also, I want to say one more thing. The last 15 minutes wondering if I could just type into the chat box that I have to pee, and you guys could keep talking.
All right, I'm going to plug one more.
Please
thing.
do. Yes.
You told me to plug my website, but I'm not gonna. I'm going to plug. If anyone out there is living in Maryland and you're looking for an amazing early educator to join your team, look at this third person in this podcast.
Look Bethany no Corrie further than Bethany Corrie.
And you need to grab her up quickly if you're in Maryland.
When is this going to air? Because I want to link it on with my resume.
Oh, sure. Well, it could air
this was my recommendation
Wednesday.
Right here. That was my reference.
It could air in 4 days because I have to send Jeff new episodes. He's all empty over there after this week.
I'm not going to plug myself since Richard did. But I wanted to mention a book that I really love and it helped me. Well, 2 books.
Yeah.
Helped me like.
We don't really like books on this show.
We don't. But personally, it helped me on my journey.
Yeah.
One through depression, which is a bitch, and we should all
yes.
Acknowledge that.
Yes.
And also just on this mindfulness journey, the first one that I was introduced to, it's called The Mindful Way Through Depression.
Oh,
And it's written by a handful of authors, and John Kabat-Zinn was either on it or did the foreword for it. And it is a beautiful book, and I revisit it often. And I think even if you don't have depression, you should read it, because you probably do.
yeah.
And then the other is The Body Keeps the Score by Bessel van der Kolk, which Bessel, if you're listening, I love you. I think I love him as much as you love Alfie.
Oh, wow.
And you're invited to dinner, Bessel.
Okay. Well, here's my
man.
tip for you, Bethany.
Dinner?
Never joke on a public podcast about a threesome. Because
No.
that seems to have really turned off any possibility of communicating further with Alfie Cohen.
I'm not necessarily interested in a threesome, but
I'm not either, but it's a funny
I'm
joke.
up for anything.
I'm up for anything.
It won't be depressing. We know that.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay. Well, I don't want to take focus away from
It'll be a mindful interaction with this person. However,
It would be.
Mm-hmm.
It would be.
Yep.
Oh my
Very
God.
mindful dinner.
All right. So now I really am about to wet my pants.
All right.
So we better wrap this up. Professionally speaking. Okay. So thanks both of you for being on. I always love to talk to both of you. And it feels like I haven't done that in a long time with either of you, really. Yeah. And thanks to everybody for listening. And we'll have another episode next week of That Early Childhood Nerd. Bye.